When thinking of an effective scene in any sort of horror media, what comes to mind? Is it the design of the locale? Maybe a startling jump scare? Perhaps the typical violin horror plucking puts you on edge? Maybe you answered differently. Perhaps the term suspense came to mind. A long con of emotions carried by trust misplaced in a faulty safety net of neutrality in the given scenario. Like a thread, it is woven through a material made of mundane actions and unimportant tasks, until, eventually, the spine breaks, and the abused, miserable beast lashes out. Jump scares and the like are generally considered effective at the climax. However, this is only true with a sufficient amount of suspense. Without it, repetitive scares become both stale due to progressive familiarization with the methods used and the recovery time from the previous encounter. When condensed, clear-cut patterns reveal themselves to us and ruin the charm of the experience. The inner workings become obvious, and any real value dissolves, leaving us with a worn-out, dull shell of what used to be a vibrant process. Whereas jump scares are effectual in producing shock, the mediator, suspense, keeps us waiting on the edge of our seats until that time comes. Without a gradual build-up, the outcome is likely to fall short. Like an Olympic runner, it takes a period of time before they reach their maximum efficiency. In the setting of suspense and horror, it takes time before the scare reaches its most opportune point of arrival. As such, it is important when creating horror media to work with time instead of against it. We do not want to fill every minute with a scare, no matter how effective you think it may be. Subtlety in our approach is what makes the outcome memorable. A fake-out can be an even more impactful method, luring the user into false sense of concern, only for that to lead to nothing more than silence. But what if suspense is used outside of what is strictly meant to be considered horror? Is it pointless? Does it bring in an unnecessary element to the work? Of course not. It adds another layer of emotion and thought, manifesting in any individual who pays even the slightest bit of attention to the piece. The raised heart rate when a character is on the verge of death, slow movement through a silent room where the tension is broken by someone who is just off screen coming into frame, turning around to see a friendly face that hadn't made their presence known. Although these hypothetical and often used scenes are not inherently frightening, they can lead to shock in viewers that most would consider uncharacteristic for the genre, depending on what outcome is reached, whether it be a romance, drama, action, adventure, and so on. The greatest link to this emotional chain is the viewer themselves.
The aliens are coming. Join us as we welcome our transgalactic brethren with open arms on this glorious day of unity. Yes? What do you mean, under attack? We're perfectly safe here. Washington? What about Washington? Sir, there is nothing, I repeat, nothing to be afraid of. It will all be over soon. That much I promise.
Signal Simulator is a game published and developed by Blagavest Penev, taking heavy inspiration from the real-world Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, or SETI Institute for short. We are tasked with extracting information from signals we receive from interstellar origins, along with maintaining system functionality and exploring oddities on the premises. We're left on our own in the middle of an open dry land with the occasional supply drop and customizable radio as our sole means of feedback from the rest of the world.
We are trying something new today. This is our first nationwide social. We have people at 6 other NASA centers around the nation joining us today. Who will
Beyond that, the distant movement of the many satellites in the compound and the aforementioned radio is all that breaks the silent atmosphere, unless we count our nosy visitors' curious exploits. Apart from the main shore, scanning signals, we're given the freedom to explore the facility. Various out-of-place objects and peculiarities can be found littered across the grounds. Both ourselves and the on-site rover are able to interact with a number of them. For the sake of thematics and evasion of spoilers, I will refrain from covering them in any sort of detail. I'd prefer if you experienced them yourself. While exploring, you'll come across the many satellites, along with the possibility of other landmarks. The majority of these being dynamic objects that require your constant attention. The solar panels are the main source of power for our satellites and observatory. With time, they require cleaning. This is straightforward enough. Press the button to wipe the panels. As a backup, we may venture outside to turn on our generator, utilizing the limited fuel delivered on a daily basis by the helicopter. On the other hand, the satellites themselves can suffer from a gradual offset that increases in severity over time, resulting in skewed metrics and difficulty in retaining accuracy. When this issue arises, we're left with 2 possible solutions. We either use a command to automatically align the dishes. This can take a considerable amount of time without any upgrades. Sleeping is an excellent way to skip ahead, however, this is valuable scanning time wasted. Or we can leave the concrete walls of the facility and drive to each satellite that requires major attention, readjusting each one by hand as we go. A map is provided on the bulletin board inside. Early on, this tends to be much faster and ideal if only a few are in desperate need of attention. In addition to rectifying the mechanical faults, software can run awry. A simple reboot from the main observatory may be sufficient in rectifying any troublesome bugs. In other cases, we will have to travel to the satellite once more and input commands in the terminal. Unfortunately, software glitches do not care for the time they occur. The rarest of the malfunctions comes in the form of power outages caused by thunderstorms. With no exceptions, these require us to return to the satellites and flip the breakers beneath them. Whether it be early in the morning or late at night, abnormalities may manifest without warning. We're left in the open, exposed on all fronts to absent prying eyes in our isolated environment. Returning to the topic of searching for signals from far-off worlds, stars, unknown and uncanny sources, the process is slow in the beginning, but picks up over time as more upgrades are acquired, strategies are formed, and skills are sharpened. Despite the relative simplicity in the steps needed, a true payout can take extreme lengths of time before becoming apparent, hours, even days before anything of note occurs. Granted, this tedium is not for everyone, but for those that this appeals to, this may be one of the most horrifying experiences one can endure. Added effects brought on by spontaneous changes in weather patterns, the monitors briefly displaying points of view that are remarkably familiar, but with unwelcome guests present. Disturbing otherworldly feedback from a scanned signal, and other less expected phenomena. The instruments are assembled, awaiting the band's debut. In the meantime, we, the audience, remain preoccupied with our own devices, whilst the strings are pulled from the rafters. And once the precipice is reached, new sights reveal themselves to us. A degree of fiction placed in our imitation of real-world studies, for our own pleasure and terror. Brief, albeit effective, to the right individual. So how exactly does Signal Simulator evoke a feeling as powerful as Suspense? With an absence of constant events and lack of exorbitant effects, we're left only with time. And in that time, there's little to fill in the gaps beyond our continued anticipation of something to jump out at us or to be nonchalantly seated within our peripheral vision as a sort of taunt. And with the extended period of nothing, our expectations build to an ever-increasing degree. Not in the sense of a finely crafted, highly detailed, and perfectly executed scare, but of something startling enough for us to have a frightened reaction to an otherwise fascinating spectacle. The true intentions of the developer's vision are left for our own individual interpretation. Nothing is directly startling, however, nothing is obviously inviting. It's simply a matter of how our nerves handle an object or entity so clearly out of place when in comparison to what we've become accustomed to. Suspense, like many feelings, is dependent on the victim. How the resulting consequences unfold will be dependent on how the victim perceives the potential outcomes. As such, a piece of otherwise quote-unquote normal media may be left to the same dull cage from the perspective of some, whereas others with more inventive imaginations may fabricate a story and setting leagues more inventive. Despite its perceived faults and bugs, Signal Simulator is anything but normal, a stark contrast to a majority of art available. It features a sense of tension unlike any other artwork. Very few have made sitting at a desk and exploring a relatively empty field for hours on end as enjoyable as Signal Simulator has. Although updates have been stagnant for over a year, the product stands proud in a sea of mediocre attempts, and to that, I wish the developer the best of luck. On behalf of the study, thank you and good night.